Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight for this Stand By What You Sell webinar that we're running. Integrity Systems Company is partnering with the New South Wales DPI to run this webinar tonight. So thank you all for coming. We've got really great attendance for this webinar, which we're really happy about. So thanks for joining us. My name's Cherie Young. I'm the Communications Manager at Integrity Systems Company, and I'll be facilitating this webinar this evening. Just before we get going, just to give you a bit of a rundown of what we're going to cover off, we are going to take you through the LPA requirements. Elizabeth Bradley is Integrity System Company's Quality and Policy Manager, and she's going to take you through the 7 LPA requirements for that program, as well as give you an update on the NLIS. I'm going to give you a bit of an update on the eNVD system and how the new app's going and why we're hoping, to try and to encourage industry to shift across to a digital consignment mode. Then we'll have Dougal Gordon from New South Wales DPI, who's going to share with you an update from a New South Wales perspective on eID for sheep and goats. And then we have Jenny Bradley, in a very innovative New South Wales sheep producer who's been using eID for the last 10 years on her seed stock, and she's here to share with us some of her insights and benefits that she's gained from that. So got a lot to cover. Just to give you a bit of housekeeping, there's a Q&A box here that at the bottom of your screen you can put your questions in there, and we'll do our best to answer them. We've got team members from Integrity Systems Company and New South Wales DPI ready to answer your questions. If we don't get to all your questions, we will include the answers to those in the email that will come out with the recording from tonight and some other resources that you might find helpful. Given there is such a large group in the webinar, we may not get to everyone. Now, before I go on, just a quick little refresher on Integrity Systems Company, just so you know where we fit into the picture of the red meat industry. So Integrity Systems Company is a wholly owned subsidiary of Meat and Livestock Australia, and together with MLA, we are here to service and support the red meat industry in Australia. ISC's role in all of that centres on managing 2 key programs, which are all about ensuring the food safety and traceability of our red meat. So those 2 programs are the Livestock Production Assurance program, which you're going to be learning more about tonight from Elizabeth, and the National Livestock Identification System, the NLIS. So might just go to the next slide, Bridget. Thank you. So there's the 2 programs. We've got the LPA and the NLIS. So the LPA is your on-farm assurance program. It's all about managing your food safety, your animal welfare, and your biosecurity. And it gives a tick of assurance which demonstrates the professionalism of our industry and ensures our market access is maintained. The NLIS is a mandatory program that is all about identification and traceability of livestock. So it is about tracking livestock during disease and food safety incidents. And what underpins both of these programs is the property identification codes, or PICs, which are administered by your state and territory governments. And when the PIC system is incorporated into both of these programs, we get a national system for managing food safety and traceability. So it's all really important how it all comes together, but we'll explain a bit more about that tonight. So yeah, keep your questions coming. We'll do our best to get to them. I'm going to pass you over to Elizabeth Bradley now, who's going to take you through the LPA program. So see you soon.
Thank you, Cherie, and hello everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. So as Cherie mentioned, I'm going to walk you through some of, all of the LPA requirements and what you need to do to meet that, and how that works in with your National Vendor Declaration, as well as touch on the NLIS system, the 3 main components of that, including how eID actually works in terms of the tags. And so we'll kick off. So before we kind of dive right into the LPA requirements, I just wanted to frame it up a little bit. So carrying on from what Cherie said, approximately 70% of the red meat we produce in Australia gets exported overseas. So our trading partners overseas require some assurance that we're producing meat that meets their requirements. And so we have LPA and NLIS to help us do that. So LPA covers, as Sheree said, food safety, animal welfare, biosecurity, and there we go. And accredited producers have access to the LPA NVD to move livestock through the supply chain. Additionally, producers are required to complete their NLIS requirements for the traceability side of it, and they come together through that NVD to enable lifetime tracing of livestock and their food safety status back to where they were born. So the LPA NVD is actually a legal declaration, as you may be well aware, and it's important to understand what you're actually signing and completing when you fill it out, because you need to have records that back up those declarations, which is where the LPA requirements come in. So as an overview, LPA accreditation needs to be kept current, so you need to renew it every 3 years. You need to follow the LPA standards and make sure you're keeping adequate records to back up those declarations on those NVDs as well. The last little bit around LPA is that you can actually be selected for an audit, so it's important to follow the requirements and have your records there ready in case you do actually get audited. So the LPA program contains 7 different elements. So they're up on screen there, and we're going to run through them all tonight. So property risk assessment, safe and responsible animal treatments, stock foods, fodder crops, grain and pasture treatments, all talk to food safety. And then we have preparation for dispatch of livestock, which is also a little bit about food safety, but also touches on welfare. We have livestock transactions and movements, which really brings in that NVD and the NLIS requirements, as well as biosecurity and animal welfare. Now, it's a short and sharp kind of overview of the need to knows tonight for LPA, but we do have additional learning freely available on our website. We have dedicated learning modules that you can access for free and do anytime you like, and even put your staff through them, which talks to all of these requirements in detail. So without further ado, we'll start off with property risk assessments, which is number 1 in the standards. So property risk assessments is all about aiming to minimise the risk of contamination, both chemical and physical, in livestock, because they end up being food, as we know. So the 3 main things with LPA is to have a farm map, a property risk assessment, and a process for managing contaminated livestock, so that when you do go to move them off your property, you can fill out that NVD properly. So it's all about bringing in that record keeping for that. I know risk assessments can sound a little bit scary, but it's kind of simple. All you need to know is what's on your property and then how you prevent livestock accessing those risks. So common examples we find is things like old dip sites, rubbish tips, old chemical drums or chemical storages, machinery, old batteries, or even broken infrastructure like wire from fences and things like that. So having those all mapped out on your farm map and then writing them all down, and then what you're doing to control those risks of livestock becoming contaminated is pretty much the risk assessment process. And then being able to identify any livestock that might have been accidentally exposed, and then managing them through on that NVD if you move them off your property. The second element of the LPA program is safe and responsible animal treatments. So this one has two sort of areas. So one is that you want to be administering the treatment so that the animal's getting an effective dose and the treatment's effective. So making sure it's doing its job. And the other part is around minimising the risk of contamination from that treatment. So around this is food safety, because you're administering a drug to the animal, so it could leave a residue. So things you can do around this requirement is keep really good records of those treatments. So things like what you've treated, when, the name, the batch, the expiry date, the dose rate, all of the information is really important. So then you can then transfer that onto your NVD as well to make sure that withholding periods or export slaughter intervals are communicated when selling. Other things you can do around animal treatments is also knowing how to store and dispose of your treatments as well, including expired treatments. We see a lot of expired treatments sitting in storage sheds as well, which you need to get rid of as well, because they can actually do more harm than good if you actually accidentally administer them to livestock. Having copies of your withholding periods and export slaughter intervals for all of your animal treatments also is really important, so you know what to put down on those records. And when you're buying in livestock, it's good to keep a record of any that have also been in a withholding period as well, so you're aware of that treatment history for that animal. The final thing here is around getting written authorization from your vet for any off-label use of animal treatments as well, to make sure that that's administered correctly. Now, keeping on the food safety train and in line with the chemical requirements too, we've got the next requirement of LPA, which is all around what livestock eat effectively. So this one is all around incoming food or your pastures and keeping them away from restricted animal materials or RAN. So for this in LPA, it's all around, again, chemical residues in the feed that they might eat or being exposed to things like spray drift, and also making sure that they don't have access to restricted animal materials, because that can actually cause very, very serious issues. So chemical treatments on your pastures, or the chemical treatments that might be on the food that you bring in, so grain or hay or fodder or anything like that. It's all around managing and minimising that risk of contamination. So again, it all comes down to using chemicals. So if you're using chemicals on site, how are you storing them, making sure you're using and disposing of them properly, keeping them stored away from livestock. Completing a chemical users course if you're actually applying chemicals yourself. Again, keeping really good records of what you've treated, with what the batch numbers, withholding periods, and making sure livestock aren't allowed to graze those areas until those periods have expired. For incoming feed, it's important to get a commodity vendor declaration or some sort of assurance from the provider that you're buying from, that they're not in a withholding period, or if they are, that's fine too, just managing that risk of contamination if they're going to eat that product. Again, if you have accidentally had animals be exposed, it's all around managing that risk and declaring it on that NVD as it moves off the property as well. So the fourth element of LPA is preparation for transport. So this one is also called fit to load, and it's relatively well done in the industry in terms of LPA, that is. So this one's all around making sure that livestock are fit for the journey, the intended journey, and it's all about minimising stress, injury and contamination. So this one's highly visible to the community and generally gets a lot of scrutiny from the community as well. So it's really important that we're only loading animals that are fit for the journey where relevant. How you meet this under LPA is all around your transporter being reputable, having your NVDs, doing that fit to load check as they're assembling and being loaded onto that vehicle. The MLA's fit to load guide is a really great resource. It gives you great examples of what to do and what to look out for. So the next element I'm going to talk about is biosecurity. So biosecurity has been really big in the last 12 months, especially with the risks of foot and mouth disease and lumpy skin disease that have occurred. So biosecurity is all around protecting your property and your livestock. So it's all around the infectious diseases or pests and weeds and stopping them from entering and establishing on your farm. It's all about being observant and vigilant and knowing what to do if you suspect an issue or something you're really not sure about. So that contingency planning as well. In LPA, it's a requirement to have a documented farm biosecurity plan. So we'll accept any template, any form, digital or paper, whatever you prefer. We have an LPA template to help you out. It asks you some questions and it gives you some prompts around some controls that are quite regularly used. Some tips and tricks, it's about controlling the entry of people, livestock, equipment and things coming onto your property to minimise the risk of diseases and weeds and things that you don't necessarily want to come onto your property. It's all about being reasonable and what you can practically control. You can't control the wind or the birds flying overhead, but you can try your best to control people with signs and gates and fences. If you do have visitors, having a visitor log, knowing what parts of the property they've gone to see, as well as having contact details for your vet or animal health officer, and emergency animal disease hotline as well is always a good one. Monitoring is also the other tool you can use. So keeping a close eye on your livestock and your property to spot anything unusual and signs of disease, especially when you're introducing livestock onto your property, because they can come with diseases, or allowing them time to empty out because you don't want to bring weed seeds and that sort of thing that they might have been, eating before they got to your property. Another common thing around biosecurity is also getting health declarations for introduced livestock when you might buy them in as well. So again, reasonable, practical, and loads of resources available online, and loads of people around to help you in and around ISC, and also with your state department as well. And the next requirement we're just going to run through here is animal welfare. So animal welfare is in LPA relates to the national standards for animal welfare that are agreed. And so this is all around having access to those standards and understanding them. So if you do get audited, you need to have a copy on hand to show that you've actually got them and know about them. They're available on the ISC website. They are species specific, so there's one for cattle, one for sheep, one for goats. And you can print it off or have it on a computer and provide it to staff if they're involved in animal welfare husbandry practices. Another requirement is to have training in these standards and guidelines. So we offer that as part of your LPA accreditation for free. You can do it as many times as you like and put your staff through it as well. Another thing to do is also train your staff in these standards and guidelines where it's applicable to their role, and make sure they understand their requirements under these standards and guidelines. So the final part of LPA I want to talk about, which will bring in that NLIS requirement, is actually around the livestock transactions and movements. So this is bringing all your on-farm records and all your practices, and that completion of the NVD when you actually do sell livestock. So NVDs have to be completed when you sell livestock or move them off your property, and this requirement of LPA also brings in those NLIS requirements around identification and recording. So the NVD is, again, a legal declaration you have to complete and have those records to back up around treatment, grazing, and things like that. Livestock transactions and movements is important, especially NVDs, as they back up the food safety claims that the processors need to know in order to service what markets they're going to send to. And together with NLIS, it ties together and supports the traceability from property of birth right through to where that animal might be. So for LPA, you need to complete an NVD for all outgoing livestock transactions, and get copies of NVDs for any livestock coming onto your property as well, and keep a copy of those. Again, you need to record livestock movements onto your PIC in the NLIS database. It's usually 2 days from that movement actually physically happening. And also make sure you have livestock identification devices attached to your livestock before they move your property. So with NVDs, I know that there's a lot of paper NVDs that get used, and that's historically how it's happened. The issue we have with NVDs, and paper NVDs in particular at this point in time, is that a lot of them don't get filled out properly. So we see a lot of NVDs where we can't read the writing, or the questions aren't completed properly, or you haven't signed it, or potentially questions are answered both yes and no, which means that they're basically invalid, and we have to go back and try and figure out what was actually supposed to be on that piece of paper. So the push is to move to electronic, because it actually overcomes all these barriers. So it prevents all these invalid NVDs happening. And if you're logging into your LPA account, it'll actually prompt you and show you more things about eNVD as well. But I'm going to take a pause here and let Cherie take over and tell you all about the benefits of eNVD and a little bit about the eNVD mobile app. Cherie.
Thank you, Elizabeth. So why is transitioning to digital consignment so important? I think Elizabeth's just given us a great introduction into that, but I think best place to start is the challenges that we are being presented with paper. I think you can see from this slide that there definitely are issues with the paper incomplete NVDs. We're finding that the NVD system is changing, and then those changes can be very slow to filter through, which often means books are going out of date or old NVDs are being accidentally used, which creates issues. We've got paper forms that can be lost, damaged, or misfiled. We've got writing that can be hard to read, and information that can be filled in incorrectly. And then we've then we sort of go into the issue of duplication of forms. So you've got, lots of different forms being filled in multiple times, which basically is just a bit of a breeding ground for a pretty inefficient system in the scheme of things, which does play a part in undermining the robustness of our integrity system, which underpins our exports. So it's really important that we kind of tried to find a better way, and that's what happened in 2018. Integrity Systems Company launched the eNVD web system, which is a voluntary system for LPA accredited producers to do digital consignments for their livestock. So it started out as this web-based system, which brought a lot of benefits. It's easy to read. There was less duplication of filling in the same form over and over and again. The forms are always available. They're online. You just have that more digital capture of information. And when it comes to times for your LPA audit, for example, all of that paperwork and forms are all just there, so your auditor can easily see them. So the eNVD had a lot of benefits, but the big problem with it was connectivity, and especially not having internet at the yards, down in the paddock where you really need it. So that was kind of why, this was in like preventing this sort of end-to-end digital transfer. It was a big roadblock, which is why Integrity Systems went away and developed the eNVD app, which was released this year in March. It has an offline functionality, so it's overcome that hurdle of lack of connectivity. It was launched in March, and we've exceeded 15,000 downloads of the app. Every month there's more and more use coming through of the app, which is really, really good. It has some functionality in there so that it works alongside the web system quite well, in that you can start a consignment in the office and then take your phone out to the yards and finish it there. If your transporter comes and they're ready to go with the app, and you don't have internet, you can use the QR code feature to transfer the consignment details across to that person when they arrive. So there's lots and lots of benefits. There's a templates function, so you can set up regular consignments that you might send on a regular basis and just repeat them. So you're not having to repeat yourself and refill in information. So there is a lot of benefits. As you can imagine, this is a big change for industry. There's a lot of adoption work been going on out in the field for the last 18 months through the process sector, processors, feedlots, the transport sector, agents and sale yards, to help all of those different parts of the supply chain become digital and get on board with this solution. And that work is continuing, but it is a big change. And I guess our biggest piece of advice is just to check in with your receiver, including your transporter, and just make sure they're ready to receive a digital consignment. If they're not ready, you can print out the digital consignment from your phone, from your computer. You can also email it through the app to them. It may seem like you're defeating the purpose, but you have captured that information digitally. So there is a benefit for that, even if you do need to print it out, and while the rest of industry sort of gets on board with it. There is benefits for having that data there digitally in the long run, because then other parts of the supply chain can pick it up. So yeah, we would really encourage you to do that. It's also important to keep in mind that you still need the receiver of stock still needs to do the NLIS transfer as well. So there's still that two-step process. At the moment, that is still the case. But yes, there are definitely benefits for getting on board with this, and It's also a constantly being worked on, and there's lots of feedback coming back to us from users across the supply chain, and our technical teams are really working hard to address those issues. So there's new versions of the app that come out quite regularly that have addressed certain issues, and that's a work in progress. That work will continue. We accept this is very early days in this journey, and the work will continue. So we encourage you to give it a go and let us know what you think, and we're happy to build that in to how we go with it in the future. But yeah, so thanks for that. I think that's covered off where we're at with the app. So, there's resources. How could I forget? Resources available to help you use it. There's that web address there on your screen has a lot of different tools, videos, help sheets to help you navigate the app. And you can always call our customer service centre if you want to talk through any particular issues you're having. The team there are more than happy to help. So yeah, with that, I will hand you back to Elizabeth, because I think she still wants to go through a little bit of NLIS before we cross over to Dougal and Jenny. So thanks, Elizabeth.
Great, thanks, Cherie. Yes, I do want to just talk about NLIS requirements, so everyone's clear about that as a good reminder. So NLIS is made up of 3 components. So the first being the identification of locations or properties, so PICs, also identifying our livestock with NLIS devices, and then recording those movements in the NLIS database. And with that recording of the livestock movements, we can actually record that NVD in as well. So we bring those two together. So as a reminder, your PIC gets issued by Local Land Services in New South Wales. So if you need to update it, make sure you do that with them. It's an 8-character code. Every property and location that has livestock in Australia has one, and that's how we start the process of tracing in the database. I'll talk about tags in just 1 second, but recording livestock movements is really critical. So the receiver is responsible for recording that livestock movement in the database. So if you're sending to a feedlot or a processor or a sale yard, they'll do that transfer for you. If you're using an agent or a third party to do that transfer for you, it's really important that you check that it's been done. There's 2 ways you can do that. One is to ask them for an upload ID. The second is to create an NLIS account and check yourself. So there's loads of how-to guides on how to use all of that, and videos, and we can always help you as well. But there's just a reminder about the responsibilities to record those movements. So before I hand over to Dougal, I'm just going to explain about animal identification requirements, and in particular eIDs. So NLIS identification devices, ISC actually approves those through a trialling process, and they will have an NLIS logo printed on them. It's one tag per animal. For cattle, it's in the right ear, and for sheep or goats, it can be in either ear. The colours for cattle, if the cattle was born on that property, it gets a white tag, and if it wasn't born on that property, it gets an orange one. For sheep and goats, it's yellow or year of birth colour if it was born on that property, and if it wasn't born on that property, it gets a pink tag. So there's some little just reminders about the tagging requirements. If you have a look on ISC's website, there's a full list of devices for cattle and for sheep that are accredited for use, and you can buy them directly from the manufacturers. So talking about eIDs, because sometimes it can be a bit confusing about how it all happens. When you order tags or electronic devices from manufacturers, the eIDs actually contain a microchip called an RFID, and it has a 16-digit code that gets coded into that microchip. That's a unique number that the manufacturers come up with, and that number can be read by a scanner. So when you have eIDs, you need scanners to read those numbers. The other number that gets associated with the eID is actually an NLIS ID, which gets printed on the outside of the tag. So this is going to have your PIC on it if you're ordering it for your PIC, and the manufacturer will actually check that you're authorised to place an order for that PIC. It'll have their code as a manufacturer, a letter for the species and whether it's a breeder tag or not, and then the year it was made. The rest of that is a serial number to keep that number unique. So what the manufacturers will do then is they'll associate those 2 numbers together as one tag, and say you ordered 100 tags, they'll upload all of those numbers to your NLIS, to the NLIS database, and that's registered on your pick then. So that's how the tags get onto your pick in the database. And then when you attach them to animals and move them on, the person that you sell them to or give them to will then remove all of those tags once they've scanned them on arrival, and they'll transfer them onto their pick in the database. So that's sort of a 101 around how eIDs work, and it's how it has individualized numbers, so we can track that. So that's sort of the overview of eIDs. And without further ado, I will hand over to Dougal, who's going to talk to you about sheep and goat eID implementation in New South Wales. So, Dougal, over to you.
Yeah, thanks very much, Elizabeth. So there's a few things I thought I'd cover off on. Firstly, and importantly, if I can get this slide to go to the next one, is that while we're actually transitioning to electronic identification, sorry, I'll just go back, it's jumping around, because I think that's really important for a lot of producers to understand while we're making that transition and while we're doing it now. So there's a few different reasons that are relevant in this space. Firstly, in the top left-hand corner of the slide, you'll see there that, and this is the key reason, it's because electronic identification delivers more timely and accurate traceability. Now, why is that important? Timely and accurate traceability is important because if we do have an exotic disease outbreak, like foot and mouth disease, for example, then that disease spreads really quickly. And we know, for instance, in the foot and mouth disease outbreak in the UK, the disease actually doubled in its spread over 5 days. And in fact, it took 7 weeks to actually identify and trace those animals, by which time it was spread over the whole of the UK. Now, it took them 7 years to get back their markets. So we certainly can't afford to do that. So what the key advantage of electronic identification is that it will actually, by being able to accurately and trace those animals more quickly, it means that we can reduce the impact and disease spread, and impact therefore on both animals, producers, but also markets and farm gate prices, because there's a direct correlation, obviously, between the lost market access and farm gate prices in Australia, and I'll talk about that next. So we are very much export orientated in Australia. So as was touched on before, the vast majority of our production is exported. So on the sheep meat side, 78% of our production is exported. Goat meat, it's 95%, and wool, it's actually 98%. So there's a direct correlation, therefore, between market access and our farm gate prices that we are actually derived from those. So as a direct result, of course, of that export market orientation, therefore our foot and mouth disease outbreaks are going to be significant in terms of their impact on ourselves. So some of you, many of you will have heard this figure, but there's an estimated $80 billion impact of foot and mouth disease over 10 years. Now, on a weekly basis, that's $300 million for every week that we're out of our export markets. Now, they're big dollars and certainly larger than the costs of implementing eID. So that's what this is all about. Now, importantly, it will not prevent an outbreak, but what it will do is actually reduce the amount of disease spread, the amount of time that it takes to respond and manage a disease, and hopefully the amount of time, therefore, that we can demonstrate disease freedom and get back into our key export markets. Now, the time's actually right from a government perspective, and that's why in September last year that all Australian governments decided to implement mandatory individual electronic identification for sheep and farm goats. And that's because of a few different reasons, many of which I've just touched on, but particularly because the foot and mouth disease, there was an outbreak in Indonesia, our close neighbour to the north. Now, more recently, of course, Indonesia has transitioned the status of FMD in Indonesia to management status. Now, what does that mean? It means they're no longer seeking to eradicate it. So as a result of that, that's heightened the degree of potential risks to Australia in terms of contracting FMD. Now, importantly, due to globalisation and therefore the movement of both people and goods around the world, there's actually a heightened degree of risk that we'll actually contract a significant animal disease in Australia. And they're things like foot and mouth disease, lumpy skin disease, African swine fever in pigs, etc. And so as a result of that, we need to actually lift our game in terms of biosecurity management. And we've talked about, from an LPA point of view, what producers currently can do. And another element of that is eID. And of course, biosecurity is a role for everyone. whether it's producers, industry or government. And so eID enables certainly an improvement in the integrity and robustness associated with biosecurity. The other key element here in terms of the timing is that we can learn from the precedent set from not only cattle. In New South Wales, we implemented eID in cattle in 2004, and certainly from sheep and goat eID, we've had the benefit of the Victorian experience. They implemented eID in sheep and goats from 2017. And of course, the EU, so our customers, as well as potential competitors, are implementing eID. So the EU, after the 2001 FMD outbreak, they implemented eID from 2009. We also know that the current system using visual tags and a mob-based system with NVDs is no longer good enough. The Safe Meat Traceability Report from 2020 determined that that using a visual tag mob-based system, only 70% of animals were able to be traced within 24 hours for the last 30 days in terms of movements. Now, compared to eID, they had 99.64% of those animals were able to be traced within 24 hours. Now, the key element here is the 24-hour period. Now, of course, those 70% could all potentially be traced, but under a longer time period. And as I said previously, time is of the essence if you've got an exotic disease emergency. And those standards are actually national and international traceability performance standards. And unfortunately, our visual mob-based system is no longer adhering to those. I mentioned before, other countries are adopting eID, such as the EU. They're certainly not the only ones, but also our overseas customers are starting to question our traceability arrangements. And we know, for instance, in Victoria, that a number of processors are certainly looking favourably upon the eID arrangements in place in that particular market. So what does it mean for the various states? I know with this particular webinar refers to New South Wales, but it's important to point out the state-by-state comparison as to when eID will be implemented for the movement of all sheep and farm goats, and the key dates there on your screen. So Victoria, as I mentioned, they started implementing eID in 2017, but in 2022, the 1st of Jan, all sheep and farm goat movements required an eID device. WA, they've decided to be consistent with the national requirements. And so nationally, they set ostensibly a date of the 1st of Jan 2025, from which you actually will commence eID. Now, that's been interpreted differently in various states. So New South Wales, Queensland and South Australia, we've taken a more liberal approach and will be implementing eID for all sheep and farm goat movements from that 1st of Jan 2027. Now, in New South Wales, and our implementation plan was launched in December last year, we also have specified that from a producer perspective, and I thought I'd just touch on that today, that from the 1st of Jan 2025, all lambs and kids will be required to have an eID tag. So they're the key timeframes across the states, but also including New South Wales. I won't touch on the Saturday and processor requirements today because I've got limited time. So what are the different requirements for both sheep and goats? So from a sheep perspective, it's quite simple, really. And the key message I want to impart today is that basically we're just transitioning from a visual tag to an eID tag. So the current NLIS rules are that you have to have a visual tag for each and every animal before they leave the property of origin. And now they have to have an eID tag. So the tag changes, not the rules. So it's a simple message, certainly for sheep. Goats, it is also quite simple. So farm goats is exactly the same as sheep. You're transitioning from a visual tag requirement, which is currently in place, to an eID tag. So sheep and farm goats, basically you're just changing the tag. Now, in terms of harvested rangeland goats, they're currently entitled to a tag-free movement if they're transported directly from the property of capture to slaughter or via one registered depot. Now, those arrangements, industry was supportive of retaining under eID, and the New South Wales government has agreed with that. And so that's going to be the requirements under eID as well. So in short, only the tag changes for sheep and farm goats, but for harvested rangeland goats, they'll still be entitled to a tag-free exemption if they meet that requirement in terms of property of capture, direct to slaughter, or via one registered depot. Now, I won't talk to the harvested rangeland goat definition, but that definition is down on the screen. Capture from a wild state, not born as direct result of a managed breeding program or subject to any husbandry practice or treatment. Now, that's the industry definition, and that's the definition we've retained certainly in New South Wales. So some of this has already been covered. So in terms of producer requirements, certainly you'll need to purchase eID tags. Now, they range in prices depending on the manufacturer and the type of eID tag used. And so the range is roughly from $1.75 through to $2.36. On average, they're about $2 a tag. Certainly in New South Wales, we're supportive of implementing a national tag tender. There is a tag tender in place in Victoria. We think under a national arrangement, we'll be able to hopefully deliver competitive market pressures that will reduce the retail prices of eID tags. And we're hoping to use that tag tender to do that. That's our current stance on that one. You will have to use a reader if, in fact, you're actually purchasing sheep or goats from another property, so i.e. a property-to-property movement. Now, of course, you don't necessarily have to buy a reader to do that. You can actually get an agent, the vendor or a transporter to actually do that reading on your behalf and uploading to the database, but that has to be by prior arrangement. So cattle readers will work on sheep eID tags, sheep and goat eID tags. So you won't necessarily have to buy a new reader if you've already got one for your cattle. And I think it was mentioned previously, oh no, it wasn't, but in terms of cattle NLIS tags, do not use them on sheep and goats. So there's some just key messages that I thought I'd finish up on. And of course, I'm happy to answer any questions as they come through on the chat. So back to you, Cherie, is it?
Thank you, Dougal. Thanks so much. Okay, so now we're going to introduce Jenny Bradley to come into the webinar. Jenny is the co-owner and operator of a mixed farming business in Central West New South Wales focused on prime lamb and wool production. And she also runs a seed stock breeding operation. Almost 10 years ago, Jenny implemented sheep eID for the seed stock arm of her business, and tonight she's kind enough to join us to explain the benefits that has brought to her operation. So I'd just like to welcome Jenny Bradley to the webinar.
Thanks, Cherie. Thanks
Hi,
for
Jenny.
having me on board. Yeah.
Thanks for coming. It's lovely to have you here. Look, we've just got a few questions to go through. So I will just start off with the first one. I was hoping that you'd be able to share with us all how you are currently using eID and what your plans are for the future.
Oh, thanks, Cherie. So we've been, as a seed stock producer and identifying the need to have 10 years into eID, as a seed stock producer, we collect a lot of data. Each animal is actually tagged at birth, and if that ewe remains within our flock for up to 6 years, that data collection points can vary from sort of 8 to 15 points per year. So eID forms a critical part of running our seed stock production. In particular, once you formulate your breeding objective, then those data points actually drive your breeding objective, and then you can work out animals that aren't performing, and then they're removed from that seed stock production system. So eID is really critical to our business, actually. Yeah, it drives it, basically. And did you want to know, future plans?
Future plans?
Future plans.
Because it seems like the sky's the limit.
It is, and it is, except I suppose my husband and I, we've been running that seed stock business by ourselves. So we run the mixed farm by ourselves until our succession plan came in to operation here 18 months ago. We had our son back on the farm. So he's identified lots of niches and improvement areas. And one of them last year was, why haven't we got eIDs in our commercial lambs that we're finishing to identify growth rates? And we just said, look, that's great. You've identified that. We're inundated with the seed stock and the data there. That'll be his baby. And he's quite keen to run with that in the finishing aspect. Yeah, I mean, identifying high growth rate lambs, low growth rate lambs in that commercial enterprise. And then you've got options, always options when you've got that much information, you've got options to sell those low growth rate rams or sell the high growth rate rams and not finish them. Yeah, so that's his baby. He's gonna run with that. Yeah, so that's great. So the future's been good. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, look forward to seeing how that all goes. So I guess the next thing was we're sort of wondering just why, you're an early adopter of eID. You've been involved in it now for almost a decade. Why did you adopt eID in the first place? Like, what motivated you to take that step?
Yeah, no glory stories here, I can tell you. And I always refer to it as like the 3 Ps. So people, paper, and paint, which is probably not paint, it's a spray paint. So particularly with people, and we have a lot of people in the yards, and collecting that data 10 years ago was actually visual tags and people reading them. So if you've got a tag, and we had a vertical swing tag 90 degrees from the animal's head, and incorrect reading, is it 611 or is it 911? And so it's a people error in collecting that data in that number of that individual animal. Then paper, so then you've got someone recording that incorrect reading, which is probably recorded correctly but it's incorrect, or read correctly and recorded incorrectly. So taking out the human error is just been magic for us, because once you lose that or capture incorrect data on a breeding animal, a seed stock animal, and identify it, it's nearly worthless to you. And that animal it's quite often culled, and it could be a high performing animal. And then paint, I have a story around paint, like single sire mating. So the single sires have paint dots, spray paint onto them to identify them. And then the rams come out after 5 weeks, and then you've got scanning. So then you've got identification with scanning, and there's early and lates, and there's twinners and singles and triplets and dries, and then you try and draft according to your dots, and it just becomes a nightmare. So those are the 3 Ps which have driven us to seek a better way of doing it, and eID was the better way of doing it. Yeah, and it's always a hold your breath moment when you first do it, with no paint, and you've been used to paint all over your sheep or spray paint all over your sheep. And then for the first time you scan or do your mating allocation without paint, and it's that hold your breath and, oh my gosh, I'm just letting them all go and they haven't got any paint on them. But it works. It always works. Yeah. Yeah. Just have faith when you're doing it.
Stuff. Okay, was also thought it'd be interesting to know, how can you quantify the value of using eID? Like, is there a way you can sort of explain that?
Well, yeah, and I think you've got a graph there, but
yeah, we can bring those slides up.
And so that genetic gain, and I've just got an index there, which is just it shows an index gain. So that index gain equals dollars to us. So, and that index gain is a combination of lots of its growth, birth weights, maternal weaning weight, fat, muscle. It's all those traits put together into one index. So over a period of time there, basically from the adoption of eID, you can see that compared to the average of the breed, we're probably moving in a nice trending line upwards. There's a number of factors in there, but that capture and use of that data through eID has been one of the major key drivers of that trend. And if you go to the second slide there, I think there may be a few reasonings behind that. So that the biggest gain there at the end, we've used mate cell during that period of time. Now, mate cell's like I describe it as a Tinder program for sheep. It's a mating allocation. And I don't think you probably could do it if you had a lot of time and a lot of paper to do it. But eID makes it easy to adopt and use mate cell to gain the most genetic gain from your mating allocations. Using AI and ET, just tracking those individual animals and their progeny, it's just all assisting all the way through. So it is quantitative, you can measure it too. But yeah, without it, it would just be too difficult. Cherie, yeah.
That's really interesting. It's good to be able to see that, just that upward trend there that's come through just from being able to pick up different pieces of data and then what you can do. So that, it helped you with your decision making of what you could do.
Yeah, it really does, because if you've got your breeding objective, which is clearly outlined and it's measurable, and then you're collecting that data, which is all measurable on that animal. And for instance, you take a growth rate. So you measure that lamb from birth, you take it a birth weight, and then you've got you've got a weaning weight, you've got an early post-weaning weight, a post-weaning weight. And if your breeding objective is really specific around those gains, then you can actually cull on that. But as I said, there's a lot of data points to be collected. The eID, individual identification of an animal, you can place all those data collection points against that animal. Remembering it doesn't go to the eID, it's only identifying the animal, but that data goes against that individual animal, and then you can use that to drive your business using your breeding objectives. Yeah, that is good.
Fantastic. Just wondered as well, obviously this is a new technology for a lot of people. How have you overcome any challenges that you encountered when you were, in those early stages of implementation?
Yeah, and there's a number of challenges. And I mean, even it's as simple as, what tag do I use? And we've been through a number of tags. We've had tags and positioning. So there's the tag design in itself, and there's lots of manufacturers out there. And I suggest to anyone who's looking at eID tags and we're having to move that way, which we are all having to move that way, is to go and shop around and talk to other people who've been using them and find out what tags have worked for them. Even the positioning of the tag in the animals for retention. Retention is a problem with mob-based tags or an eID tag. So play around with the location within the animal's ear to keep retention at a high rate. Even applicators, and then the person applying the tag too. Have an induction program if you've got someone else using those tags. So tags are an issue, or a challenge, I should say. And the equipment, because nowadays, and 10 years ago, we travelled the country looking for particular equipment that was compatible with each other and equipment that would suit us for what we wanted it to do. So I suggest anyone coming on board to have a good look around, talk to a lot of people who are using that equipment and the tags, and find out what suits you best. And while you're out there too, look at how other people have even, if you're looking at going further to looking at auto drafters, look how they've situated them within their yards for animal flow as well. It makes it so much easier to use. So they're probably the main two, is your tags and the equipment. Because your equipment can be simple too, and it can be as complicated as you like too. There's so many things out there now that you can purchase. There's so many companies selling all the whiz-bang pieces of equipment. Make sure you shop around and have a good look and talk to other farmers.
Yes, I can imagine the market is flooding with lots of options. I guess that leads into my next question is around infrastructure, and what sort of infrastructure would producers need to get started? Like just,
And Dougal gave a really good introduction there. To be compliant, you don't need a lot of equipment, and you can, if you've got cattle, you can use just your wand and your computer. If you've got a computer at home that runs an Excel spreadsheet, there's your starting point for collecting data on commercial animals. So that's oh, sorry, I've lost my train of thought. So that's the basic need is basically a wand or a panel reader to start off with, to capture movement of stock in and out of your property. And as Dougal alluded to too, any stock leaving and heading to a sale yard or an abattoir, you don't need that equipment either, because they capture all that data and do the transfers for you. And if you're doing it property to property, you don't need that equipment either, because you can, if you ask nicely, your agent may be able to transfer all that data as well. But going back to a producer looking to adopt technology, so a wand, a panel reader, a computer, and an Excel spreadsheet, or there's a lot of programs out there that are designed specifically for collecting data. And if you want to go further too, there's actually service providers out there that do provide a fee for service on that data. They'll collect your data, analyze it, and then give it in a format that you want to, that suits your breeding objective as well, on a commercial basis too. not necessarily just for seed stock, but on a commercial basis. So there's so many opportunities. It's a pretty exciting space to be in with a commercial adoption. And there are a lot of people who have already adopted it commercially and running with it. Yeah. And then, so we've gone further, of course, and auto drafting. We've got an auto drafter, but you don't need an auto drafter to go into a commercial business or enterprise and drive it. You can keep it quite simple. But within our business, we've found that that's been a great addition to our production and our seed stock. Yeah, and I think you might even have.
Yeah, I think we've got it. We've got a video. Let's see if we can get that to play, and then everyone can have a look at how that works.
So that's just our auto drafter and our computer program that's compatible with our auto drafter. And we've got, when we're doing any data collection, or any sorting of these sheep, there's probably 3 or 4 of us in the yard. So we can actually put in there into that auto drafter that we want to draft off anything that's carrying really high levels of fat and muscle. They'll draft them off. Pregnancy scanning status, they'll draft off. Remember, see, there's no paint on these sheep either. The data you enter is the data it will draft on, and it just makes life easy. It's actually taken a person out of the yards as well. It used to take 2 people to actually, no more, actually probably 3. And now with an auto drafter, it takes one person in the yard to open the gate. The dogs haven't got thumbs, and they can't open gates, I should say. Yeah, so it's only a 1-person job, and it's works wonders for married couples working in sheep yards too. It makes life easy.
So I guess that's really good, Jenny. So I guess just, are you able to put a bit of a cost estimate then on for a bait, like what producers are we looking at for sort of the basic wand setup versus something like what we just saw there with the auto drafter and, you know,
computer and
the screens and everything.
Yeah. So a simple startup package, I would imagine, if you wanted a wand, and wands do capture a lot of information, and they come with a spreadsheet that you can actually use as well, which you can adopt to your computer and use. They can start at anywhere from $1,800 to $2,200 for a simple wand reader. Most your computer, of course, is part of your business. Panel readers are a little bit more expensive. They're up to $2,200 for panel readers, and you can situate those at the end of races and the end of drafts to collect data on your tags. This particular one here, and you can actually extend that out to a 5-way draft if you like. So looking at probably $25,000 for that unit as it is there at the moment. But return on investment for us has been well worth that expense to do that.
Okay, great.
Our business.
Thanks, Jenny. I've actually got a question that's come in from one of our attendees at the webinar, which is great. This question is, what location in the ear have you found best to avoid tags being pulled? Yeah,
that's a really good question. So we double tag one side with a visual, which is hanging. Actually, we've got 3 tags. One's a visual swinging tag, but the eID goes in the back of the ear, close to the head, not too close that the ear where the ear is not too thick, but it's over the halfway of the ear closest to the body. Yeah, and we're at the back of the ear, and that makes it, actually, I think you might be able to see that on that slide there, that ear going up the race there.
Do you want that video played again to show that?
Yeah, well, there's 3. So if you don't mind. So any young ewe that's coming, any older ewes coming through will have 3 tags. One visual, one very large white visual, which is a lambing tag. And then she'll have her eIDs closely attached to the offside ear, and you may not, so there's a couple coming through there now. So that closer to the head I find is the best for retention.
Okay.
Anything that puts their heads through the fence, usually the first thing out is the visual, and the eID is always retained. The visual is the one that rips out first, and the eID stays in, we've found. Yeah, if it's positioned correctly. So great question.
Yeah, that is a great question.
Yeah.
Not sure if there's any others that doesn't seem to be any more sitting there. We are pretty much out of time as well. But I guess, Jenny, one last question. Any words of advice for anyone out there who's, you know, looking at this and going, you know, what do I, you know, I'm at the beginning, any advice, words of wisdom?
Words of wisdom, yeah, the starting point's always the hardest. Once you've made that, taken that deep breath and gone with it, just go with it, and it just becomes easier. Yeah, the more you use it, the better it is. Yeah. Fantastic.
Well,
Thanks,
look, thank you, Jenny, for your insights. I'm sure the audience got a lot out of that, and yeah, we really appreciate your time in coming on to our webinar tonight and sharing your experiences with us. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Sheree.
No problem. As I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, all the video recording and resources from tonight will be emailed out to everyone who registered. We had great attendance at this webinar tonight, and I just think that speaks to the interest that is out there for these topics. So thank you very much. Thanks to Dougal and the team from New South Wales DPI for partnering with Integrity Systems Company for this, and thank you to the Integrity Systems Company team, Bridget, for handling all the slides and doing all the hard work in the background. Thank you for that, and we hope you enjoyed the webinar, and keep your eye out for the information that will come in the next few days, all the answers to your questions plus webinar recording links. There's just on the screen there some information about Integrity Systems Company, contacts, the QR codes if you would like to scan to download the app from the App Store or Google Play Store. There's lots of resources available, and we're only too happy to help you transition and make use of those resources. So we hope you enjoyed it. We look forward to seeing you at the next one. And yeah, just a final disclaimer there that it's a declaration. We can't do it for you, but we're very much here to help, and that is absolutely true. We really want to help you with all of this. So thank you very much. And thanks to everyone for their involvement tonight.